They laughed when they cut my salary. They thought I'd walk away quietly, disappear into the sea of discarded employees who came before me, but they forgot one crucial detail. I held the keys to their kingdom, and in one night, one perfectly orchestrated night, I turned their $250 million empire into ashes. They called it the most devastating corporate collapse in Silicon Valley history. I call it justice. This is how a compliance lead they deemed expendable, brought down an entire startup with nothing but a forgotten clause and the fury of a woman scorned. My name is Madeline Cooper, and for 12 years, I bled loyalty into every corner of Tech Vault Industries. 36 years old, single, and utterly devoted to a company I'd helped build from a cramped garage startup to a $250 million unicorn. I was their compliance lead, the one who ensured every contract, every deal, every regulatory hurdle was cleared with surgical precision. They used to call me the company's guardian angel. That was before the Tuesday that changed everything. The summons came at 2:30 p.m. through Slack, a cold clinical message from HR, requesting my immediate presence in conference room 7, the glass one, the execution chamber, as we called it, where careers went to die. My stomach twisted, but I maintained my composure, closing my laptop with steady hands that betrayed nothing of the ice forming in my veins. The walk from my desk to that room felt like a funeral procession. Colleagues averted their eyes, suddenly fascinated by their screens. Sarah from accounting, who'd shared lunch with me just yesterday, actually turned away when I passed. They knew. Everyone always knew when the axe was about to fall. Inside the glass cage sat 3 executioners. Janet from HR, her face a mask of practiced sympathy. Marcus, the new CFO who'd been brought in to optimize operations, and David Cross, my VP, the man who'd called me his rock star just last week at the all-hands meeting. David couldn't even look up from his phone. "Madeline, please sit," Janet began, her voice dripping with that particular brand of corporate compassion that meant absolutely nothing. The folder in front of her was thin. They hadn't even bothered to make it look substantial. "We're implementing some necessary restructuring," she continued, sliding a single sheet across the polished table. "Effective immediately. Your compensation will be adjusted to reflect current market conditions and company priorities." Adjusted. Such a clean word for what they were doing. 60%. They were cutting my salary by 60%. No severance option, no transition package, no dignity, just a take-it-or-leave-it ultimatum wrapped in corporate doublespeak. "This is a joke," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I've been here since day one. I've worked 90-hour weeks, missed birthdays, canceled vacations. I wrote the compliance framework that got us through Series B funding." David finally looked up, his expression carefully neutral. "The decision's been made. Madeline, we value your contributions, but the company needs to evolve." Value. Another worthless word. They valued me so much they were destroying my life with a single signature line. "You have until end of business today to accept the new terms," Marcus added, checking his watch like he had somewhere more important to be. "Otherwise, we'll consider it a voluntary resignation." Through the glass walls, I could see the entire office pretending not to watch. Some were already gossiping in the kitchen, their animated gestures telling my story before I'd even left the room. Tomorrow, there would be a new narrative Madeline couldn't adapt. Madeline wasn't strategic enough. Madeline was legacy overhead. I stood slowly, deliberately, maintaining eye contact with each of them. "I understand," I said, my tone completely flat. No emotion, no satisfaction for them to feed on later. Janet's smile flickered with uncertainty. She'd expected tears, anger, pleading. The silence unnerved her more than any outburst could have. "We'll need your decision by 5 p.m., she reminded me as I reached for the door handle. I paused, turned back, and looked directly at David. "You know, when you build something from nothing, you learn where all the bodies are buried. You learn which walls are load-bearing and which ones are just decoration." His face paled slightly, but I didn't elaborate. Let him wonder. Let them all wonder. I walked back to my desk with my head high, ignoring the whispers that followed in my wake. They thought they were cutting dead weight, trimming the fat from their precious bottom line. They had no idea they'd just pulled the pin on a grenade that had been sitting in their foundation for 10 years. As I sat at my desk, staring at the framed photo from our first successful product launch, all of us grinning like idiots, convinced we were changing the world, a strange calm settled over me. They wanted me gone quietly, professionally, without making waves. They were about to learn that still water runs deepest, and I had been still for far too long. The apartment felt different when you knew your income was about to crater. Every piece of furniture, every bill magneted to the refrigerator, seemed to mock me, but I didn't pour wine. I didn't cry. Instead, I pulled out my old laptop, the one from the early days, before corporate IT locked everything down with their security protocols. The one that still contained every document, every contract, every legal memorandum from TechVault's chaotic inception. My fingers moved with muscle memory, navigating folders that hadn't been opened in years, board minutes from 2014, initial incorporation documents, Series A term sheets, and then, buried in a subfolder labeled Series B, Final Docs. I found it. The timestamp read 3:47 a.m., dated 10 years ago, almost to the day. I remembered that night we'd been desperate, hemorrhaging cash, 24 hours from missing payroll. The venture capital firm, Apex Partners, had us over a barrel, and they knew it. Their terms were brutal, but hidden in the labyrinth of legalese was something their lawyers had insisted on: protective provisions for key personnel. I opened the PDF, scrolling through pages of mind-numbing legal text until I found it. Section 14, Subsection D, Key Stakeholder Veto Rights. My breath caught as I read the words that everyone had forgotten existed. In recognition of their essential role in company operations and institutional knowledge, the following individuals shall maintain veto authority over any acquisition, merger, or sale of company assets exceeding 30% of outstanding equity: Richard Fenmore, CEO, Angela Martinez, CTO, and Madeline Cooper, Compliance Lead. My name, in black and white, immutable. The beautiful irony was that Richard and Angela had fought against this clause, calling it unnecessary, but Apex Partners had insisted they wanted insurance that the people who knew the company's secrets couldn't be pushed out before a major transaction. They'd seen too many startups implode when key personnel were eliminated right before acquisitions. I leaned back in my chair, a laugh bubbling up from somewhere deep. The new legal team, brought in 2 years ago during our professionalization phase, had no idea this existed. The old team who drafted it had been let go in the first round of optimizations. David Cross, my supposed advocate, had been hired long after this document was buried in the digital archives. They thought I was legacy code deprecated, obsolete, ready for deletion. But I wasn't just code. I was a backdoor they'd forgotten to patch. My phone buzzed. A text from David. "Madeline, I'm sorry about today. It wasn't personal. Hope you understand." Wasn't personal. I'd given 12 years of my life, and he couldn't even deliver the blow with honesty. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened another folder, Strategic Planning, Confidential. The files here painted a picture that would make any corporate raider salivate. Inflated user metrics presented to the board, burn rate projections that conveniently omitted several major expenses, a product roadmap that anyone with technical knowledge would recognize as pure fantasy. We weren't a unicorn. We were a horse with a traffic cone taped to its head, and the tape was coming loose. But the real treasure was an email chain from 6 months ago, accidentally forwarded to me by an intern who'd since been fired. Marcus and several board members discussing exit strategies and maximizing valuation before Q3 reality check. They knew the company was in trouble. They were planning to cash out before anyone else noticed the emperor had no clothes. I made copies of everything, uploading them to multiple cloud services under anonymous accounts. Not to use immediately, that would be too obvious, too traceable, but information, like wine, sometimes needs to age before it reaches its full potency. The clock on my laptop showed 11:23 p.m. in the morning. They expected my resignation. They expected me to slink away, grateful for whatever crumbs they'd left me. But I'd spent 12 years learning every weakness in their armor, every pressure point in their corporate structure. I opened a new browser window, this time in incognito mode, and began researching Elliot Graves, CEO of Nexus Dynamics, TechVault's most aggressive competitor, a corporate shark who'd built his reputation on hostile takeovers and scorched earth acquisitions. He'd tried to poach me 3 years ago, offering double my salary to bring my compliance expertise and insider knowledge to his team. I'd turned him down out of loyalty. Loyalty. What a quaint concept that seemed now. I didn't email him directly. That would be too crude, too traceable. But I knew he monitored certain industry forums, certain anonymous tip lines, a few breadcrumbs in the right places, and he'd smell blood in the water. He'd come sniffing around, and when he did, he'd find a company far more vulnerable than anyone suspected. And when the feeding frenzy began, when TechVault's board scrambled to protect their investment, they discovered that the one person who could stop it all was the same one they'd tried to discard like yesterday's trash. I closed the laptop and finally poured that wine. They wanted me gone by 5 p.m. tomorrow. They'd get their wish. But I wouldn't be leaving empty-handed. I'd be leaving with a remote detonator, and they wouldn't even know the bomb was armed until it was far too late. 4 weeks had passed since I'd cleared out my desk, leaving behind only my access badge and a resignation letter that said nothing of substance. The severance negotiations had been predictably insulting 2 weeks' pay at the reduced rate, with enough NDAs to wallpaper my apartment. I'd signed them all with a serene smile that made Janet visibly uncomfortable. NDAs only matter if you communicate directly. They say nothing about creating opportunities for others to discover the truth independently. The tech blogs started picking up whispers in week 3. TechVault's aggressive expansion may be masking deeper issues, read one headline. Anonymous sources question sustainability of TechVault's burn rate. Read another. I sipped my morning coffee, reading each article with the detached interest of someone browsing vacation destinations they'd never visit. The breadcrumbs I'd scattered were working perfectly. A mention of irregularities in an anonymous forum here, a pointed question about their latest product metrics there. Never anything actionable, never anything traceable, just enough to make the right people start asking the right questions. Then, on a Thursday evening at 9:45 p.m., I composed the email that would change everything. The burner account I'd created was perfectly anonymous, VPN routed through 3 countries, paid for with cryptocurrency, accessed only from a laptop purchased with cash. The recipient, Elliot Graves. Mr. Graves. Someone who cares about market transparency thought you should know TechVault's Q4 projections assume a 60% conversion rate on their new enterprise product. The actual beta test results, which haven't been shared with investors, show 12%. The upcoming board meeting on November 15th will likely approve a new funding round based on these projections. A concerned observer. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. Elliot was too smart to ignore a gift like this, and too paranoid to trust it completely. He'd investigate, carefully, quietly, and what he'd find would be enough truth to make him dig deeper. The response came faster than expected. Within 72 hours, Nexus Dynamics announced they were exploring strategic opportunities in the compliance management space, corporate speak for circling prey. TechVault's stock price dipped 4% on the news. Minor turbulence, the analyst said. Nothing to worry about. But inside TechVault, I knew panic was setting in. My former colleagues still reached out occasionally, thinking they were checking on my well-being but really mining for gossip. Through their carefully worded texts, I could piece together the chaos, emergency board meetings, consultants brought in to assess market position, David Cross suddenly taking vacation days he'd been hoarding for years. The second email to Elliot was more specific. The November 15th board meeting has been moved to November 8th. They're accelerating the funding timeline. Someone inside is getting nervous. You might want to review their Series B documents from 2014, particularly Section 14. There's something interesting about acquisition approval requirements that current management seems to have forgotten. Same concerned observer. This time, I could practically feel Elliot's legal team spinning into action. They'd request those documents through the proper channels. Of course, due diligence, they'd call it, and buried in those hundreds of pages, they'd find my name and understand exactly what they were looking at, a kill switch that current management didn't even know existed. Marcus called me on a Sunday. I let it go to voicemail. Madeline, it's Marcus. Listen, I wanted to reach out. Professionally speaking, there might be some consulting opportunities coming up that could use your expertise. Good money. Really good. Give me a call back. Translation. They'd noticed the vultures circling and were beginning to suspect an inside source. They wanted to buy my silence without admitting they knew I was the leak. I deleted the voicemail and blocked his number. The third and final email to Elliot was just 2 lines. They're voting on a defensive acquisition proposal Thursday at 2 p.m. Whatever you're planning, the window is closing. Good luck. I didn't need to send anything else. The spark had been struck, and now I just had to wait for the inevitable explosion. TechVault thought they'd removed a liability when they forced me out. They had no idea they'd armed a weapon that was now pointed directly at their foundation. My phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification. Elliot Graves had viewed my profile. No connection request, no message, just a view. But in the corporate world of hostile takeovers, that was as good as a declaration of war. He knew who I was. He knew what I could do. And most importantly, he knew they'd thrown me away. I closed my laptop and walked to my window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, in a glass tower, my former employers were probably in another emergency meeting, trying to figure out how their fortress had suddenly become so vulnerable. They'd run through suspects, analyze email trails, scrutinize every former employee with an axe to grind. But they'd never suspect the woman who'd left so quietly, who'd signed every document without protest, who'd seemed so professionally accepting of her fate. After all, I was just legacy code. Wasn't I deprecated and deleted? They were about to learn that in the digital age, nothing is ever truly deleted. It just waits in the shadows for the perfect moment to execute. The news broke on a Tuesday morning at 6:30 a.m. I was already awake, watching the sunrise with my second cup of coffee, when my phone erupted with notifications. Nexus Dynamics announces $250 million hostile takeover bid for TechVault Industries. The financial press was calling it the most aggressive move in Silicon Valley this year. I called it inevitable. Within minutes, my phone was ringing. Former colleagues, reporters, even my mother who barely understood what I did for a living. I let them all go to voicemail. The only call I answered was from Lisa, my former assistant, who was whispering like she was in a war zone. Madeline, it's absolutely insane here. Richard just threw a laptop against the wall. The entire C-suite is locked in the boardroom, and security just escorted 2 board members out of the building. Nobody knows what's happening. That sounds stressful, I said, my voice carefully neutral. I'm sure they'll figure it out. But you don't understand, Lisa continued, her voice dropping even lower. Legal just discovered something in the old documents. Your name keeps coming up. They're freaking out about some clause from the Series B funding. Janet from HR looked like she was going to vomit. I smiled, taking another sip of coffee. I wouldn't know anything about that. Lisa, I've been gone for over a month. Remember? The Slack channels. I still had friends who screenshot the best parts for me were pure chaos. The #general channel had devolved into panic and speculation. The #leadership channel, which someone had forgotten to make fully private, showed the real story they'd just discovered, Section 14, subsection D. By noon, I received the call I'd been expecting. Richard Fenmore himself, CEO and co-founder, the man who hadn't spoken directly to me in 2 years except through intermediaries. Madeline, his voice was strained, trying to sound casual and failing spectacularly. I hope you're well. I'm wonderful, Richard, enjoying my newfound free time. There was a pause. I could hear muffled voices in the background legal counsel, no doubt, coaching him on what to say. We've had an unexpected situation arise. Nexus Dynamics has made an unsolicited offer, and we're reviewing our defensive options. It seems there's some old paperwork that lists you as a key stakeholder with certain authorities. How interesting, I said, examining my nails. I thought I was redundant. Isn't that what Marcus said, non-essential? That was a miscommunication, Richard said quickly. A misunderstanding. We value your contributions immensely. In fact, we'd like to bring you back immediately, with a promotion, Chief Compliance Officer, stock options, full benefits. I already have a job, Richard. I didn't. But he didn't need to know that. Madeline, please, We need you to come in. Today. The board is meeting at 3 p.m. Without your approval. We can't block this takeover. You understand what this means, don't you? Everyone's jobs are at stake. Everyone's jobs. Not when they cut my salary by 60%. Not when they humiliated me in that glass box. Only now, when their own necks were on the line. I'll think about it, I said and hung up. The next call came from David Cross, my former VP. At 2:15 p.m., 45 minutes before their emergency board meeting. Madeline, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. It wasn't my decision. Marcus and Richard overruled me. I fought for you. I swear I did. Lies. I'd seen the email chains during my final week. David had suggested the salary cut himself, calling me overpaid for a legacy position. What do you want, David? We need you here, now. The board is willing to offer you whatever you want. Name your price. We'll pay it. My price? I laughed. You couldn't afford my price. Try us, please. Elliot Graves is a destroyer. He'll gut the company. Sell it for parts. Everything we built will be gone. Everything we built. As if he'd been there in the early days. Sleeping under desks. Living on ramen. Debugging code at 4 a.m. because we couldn't afford proper QA. I'll be there at 3 p.m., I said finally. But I'm not coming to save you. I'm coming to watch. The Tech Vault headquarters looked different when you walked in holding all the cards. The security guard who'd taken my badge 5 weeks ago couldn't meet my eyes as he printed a visitor pass. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt like ascending to a throne. The boardroom was full when I arrived. Richard, Marcus, David, Janet, and 6 board members all trying to look composed while their empire crumbled around them. The legal team huddled in the corner, poring over documents they should have read a decade ago. Madeline, Richard stood, gesturing to a chair. Thank you for coming. I remained standing. You have 10 minutes to convince me why I shouldn't let Elliot Graves turn this place into a fire sale. The room erupted, offers, apologies, promises, threats all blending into white noise. Marcus actually had the audacity to suggest I had a fiduciary duty to protect shareholder value, the same shareholder value they'd ignored when they destroyed my livelihood. I raised my hand, and the room fell silent. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice cutting through their desperation like a blade. You're going to hear my terms, all of them, and then you're going to decide if your company is worth saving. The boardroom fell silent as I walked to the whiteboard, the same one where they'd mapped out their optimization strategies that had targeted me and dozens of others. I picked up a marker and began writing, each word deliberate, each line another nail in their coffin. Option 1, I said, underlining the words. Accept the buyout immediately. Elliot takes control. And based on his track record, 70% of you will be gone within 6 months. The rest will watch him dismantle everything and sell it to the highest bidder. Your equity becomes worthless paper. Richard's face was ashen. 2 board members were frantically texting their lawyers. Option 2, I continued. Fight the takeover. I exercise my veto right under Section 14D, triggering a legal battle that will cost 15 to 20 million in legal fees. During that time, your burn rate continues. Investor confidence evaporates, and key talent flees. You might win, but you'll be ruling over ashes. Marcus started to speak, but I cut him off with a look that could have frozen helium. Option 3, I paused, savoring the desperation in their eyes. Complete restructuring. Richard steps down as CEO. Marcus, you're gone today. David, you'll submit your resignation by end of business. Janet, you'll be transitioned out within 30 days with a modest severance, which is more than you offered me. This is extortion, David sputtered, his face red with indignation. No, I said calmly. Extortion would be if I was lying. Everything I'm telling you is simply the reality of your situation. You created this when you decided I was expendable. Board member Catherine Walsh, someone I'd actually respected once, leaned forward. What would your role be in this restructuring? Interim governance lead with full operational authority for 6 months. I'll stabilize the company, implement actual compliance frameworks instead of the joke you're running now, and prepare for a legitimate funding round based on real metrics, not fantasies. That's essentially making you CEO, Richard protested. No, it's making me your chemotherapy, I replied. Painful, necessary, and the only thing standing between you and corporate death. The room erupted in heated discussion. Board members huddled with lawyers. Richard and Marcus engaged in a whispered argument that looked seconds from becoming physical. Through it all, I stood perfectly still, watching them fracture like ice under pressure. Catherine Walsh called for order. We need to vote, all in favor of option 3. One by one, hands raised, even Richard, defeated and hollow-eyed, lifted his hand. Only Marcus held out. But it didn't matter. The majority had spoken. There's one more thing, I said, pulling out my phone. I need to make a call. I dialed Elliot Graves's direct line, a number he'd given me 3 years ago that I'd never used. Until now. Elliot, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. It's Madeline Cooper. I'm sitting with TechVault's board right now. Yes, that clause is real, and I'm prepared to exercise it. No, I don't think that will be necessary anymore. Why? Because effective immediately. I'm taking operational control. Yes, you heard that correctly. The blood drained from every face in the room as they realized what I was really telling Elliot. I'd orchestrated everything. The leak, the hostile bid, all of it had been to bring them to this moment. However, I continued, still on the phone, if you're interested, I think there might be partnership opportunities once I've cleaned house. The technology is solid. It's the leadership that's been the problem. Yes, let's discuss that next quarter. Thank you, Elliot. I hung up and surveyed the wreckage of the leadership team that had tried to destroy me. Marcus, security is waiting outside to escort you out. You have 15 minutes to clear your office. David, you'll stay through end of day to hand over your projects. Richard, we'll discuss your transition privately. You built something once, and out of respect for that history, you'll get a dignified exit. You planned this, Janet whispered, her face pale with realization. From the moment we cut your salary, you planned all of this. I walked to the door, then turned back to face them one last time as their equal no, their superior. You thought I was expendable because I didn't play your political games, because I didn't golf with you or laugh at your jokes or pretend your decisions made sense. You looked at 12 years of loyalty and saw weakness. You looked at competence and saw threat. You looked at me and saw someone you could crush without consequence. I opened the door where security was indeed waiting, just as I'd arranged before the meeting. You were wrong about everything except one thing. I'm a threat. I've always been a threat. The only difference is now you know it. Marcus was already being escorted out, his designer laptop bag clutched to his chest like a life preserver. David slumped in his chair, the fight completely drained from him. Richard stared at the table, perhaps finally understanding that the company he'd co-founded had just been saved and lost in the same breath. Monday morning, 8 a.m., sharp, I announced. Full staff meeting. We have a company to rebuild, and this time, we're going to do it right. Anyone who doesn't want to be part of that transformation can submit their resignation to me directly. The power in the room had shifted so completely that Catherine Walsh actually stood when I walked past her. Madeline, I should have intervened when they targeted you. I'm sorry. Your sorry doesn't restore 5 weeks of lost sleep or the humiliation of that meeting, I replied. But if you're genuinely interested in redemption, be prepared to work for it. The new Tech Vault won't have room for passive board members. The call from Richard came at 11:47 p.m. that same night. His voice was different, broken, desperate, nothing like the confident tech evangelist who'd given countless keynote speeches. Madeline, we need to talk. The board. They're reconsidering. Some of the investors are threatening to pull out entirely if I step down. They're saying we should take our chances with the courts rather than hand control to you. I was expecting this. Courage in the boardroom was temporary. Once they'd had time to think, to call their lawyers, to check their golden parachutes, they'd try to claw back control. That's unfortunate, Richard, I said, already composing an email on my laptop, because I was hoping we could do this cleanly. What does that mean? Check your inbox in 30 seconds. I hit send on the email I'd crafted to Elliot Graves, CCing Richard and the entire board. The subject line was simple: Re-Section 14D Veto Authority Final Decision. Mr. Graves, After careful consideration of TechVault's board response to your acquisition offer, I've decided to formally decline to exercise my veto authority under Section 14D. The acquisition may proceed without objection from my end. However, I believe the company would benefit from maintaining current operations during the transition. I'm willing to remain as interim governance lead to ensure smooth handover of assets and minimal disruption to ongoing projects. Please confirm your intentions by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Best regards, Madeline Cooper, Key Stakeholder, TechVault Industries. Richard's breathing on the phone became audible. You can't, Madeline. This is insane. You're going to let him destroy everything. No, Richard, you destroyed everything when you let Marcus convince you that cutting my salary would improve your bottom line. I'm just choosing who cleans up the mess. We'll honor the original agreement, he said quickly. Everything you asked for. Marcus is already gone. David cleared out his desk an hour ago. The board will vote you in as interim CEO, not just governance lead. Too late. You had your chance at 3 p.m. Now Elliot gets his. My phone started buzzing with texts from board members, but I ignored them all. Instead, I opened another email. This one to the all-staff distribution list. I'd saved this nuclear option hoping I wouldn't need it, but they'd forced my hand. TechVault team. By now, you've heard rumors about today's board meeting and the hostile takeover bid from Nexus Dynamics. I want you to hear the truth directly. 5 weeks ago, I was forced out after my salary was cut by 60% without cause or justification. This decision was made by Richard Fenmore, Marcus Webb, and David Cross. With the full support of the board, they believed I was expendable. What they didn't know was that I retained veto authority over any major acquisition, a detail from our Series B funding that current leadership had forgotten. I've spent the last 5 weeks watching them panic as Nexus circled, waiting for them to remember that the person they discarded was the only one who could save them. Today, they offered me everything: apologies, promotions, equity to exercise that veto and block the takeover. But respect isn't something you can restore with a contract amendment. Effective 9 tomorrow, I'm allowing the Nexus acquisition to proceed. For those of you who've been loyal, who've been grinding while leadership played politics, I've negotiated protection for your positions with Elliot Graves. For those who participated in the systematic elimination of experienced staff in favor of cheaper alternatives, I suggest you update your resumes tonight. The company that valued metrics over people, that saw employees as line items to be optimized, no longer exists. What comes next might be brutal, but at least it will be honest. To my former colleagues who reached out during my exit, thank you. To those who looked away, I understand. To those who celebrated my departure, good luck. Madeline Cooper. I hit send at exactly midnight. Within seconds, my phone exploded with notifications. The Slack channels would be in meltdown. Leadership would be scrambling for damage control that wouldn't come. Catherine Walsh called next. Madeline, please reconsider. We can still fix this. Catherine, you sat in that room 5 weeks ago and said nothing when they destroyed my career. You sat there today and only apologized when you realized I held power. The time for fixing things passed when you chose comfort over courage. The entire company will collapse. Hundreds of jobs will be Elliot's problem. And unlike this board, he actually knows how to value talent. The good people will survive. The parasites won't. At 12:30 a.m., Richard sent one final email to the board and executive team, which Lisa immediately forwarded to me. Effective immediately. I'm resigning as CEO of TechVault Industries. The last 5 weeks have shown me that we lost our way, prioritizing financial engineering over the people who built this company. Madeline Cooper tried to save us from ourselves today, and we responded with cowardice and attempted manipulation. We deserve what comes next. It was the first honest thing Richard had said in years. Too bad it came too late. I closed my laptop and poured a glass of wine, watching the city lights twinkle beyond my window. By morning, TechVault, as everyone knew, it would be gone. The logo would remain, maybe even some of the products. But the culture that had allowed them to dispose of people like broken equipment would be extinct. My phone buzzed with one final message, this one from Elliot Graves. Confirmed for 9 a.m. Your terms for transitional leadership accepted. We should discuss your future once the dust settles. Companies like Nexus need people like you, people who understand that loyalty is earned, not demanded, and that power is most dangerous in the hands of those who've been underestimated. See you tomorrow. I raised my glass to the empty room. To legacy code, I whispered. May it always execute when you least expect it. The morning of the acquisition was surreal. I arrived at Tech Vault at 7:30 a.m., 2 hours before the official announcement. The parking lot was already half-empty rats fleeing the sinking ship. Those who remained moved through the halls like ghosts, unsure whether they were attending a funeral or an execution. Security had a new badge waiting for me. Madeline Cooper, interim governance lead. The same guard who'd taken my old badge 6 weeks ago handed it over without making eye contact. The weight of it in my hand felt like justice. The executive floor was chaos. Boxes everywhere. Personal items hastily shoved into bags. The remnants of corporate careers being evacuated like refugees from a war zone. Janet from HR was at her desk. Mascara streaked, frantically updating her LinkedIn profile. She looked up when I passed, her mouth opening as if to speak, then closing again. What was there to say? I found David Cross in his former office, throwing awards and framed certificates into a banker's box. His Leader of the Year trophy from last quarter's company meeting went in with particular force. Madeline, he said without looking up, come to gloat. No, David, I came to ensure the transition documents are properly filed. Professional to the end, remember. He finally met my eyes, and I saw something I'd never expected from him: genuine regret. I was an idiot. Marcus convinced me you were overpaid, that we could hire 2 juniors for what we paid you. I should have fought harder. You shouldn't have had to fight at all. Recognizing value should have been instinctive for a VP. He nodded, defeated. Elliot's keeping some of the engineering team, but none of management. 12 years here, and I've got nothing to show for it but a box of meaningless accolades. I could have twisted the knife deeper, reminded him of every slight, every betrayal. Instead, I simply said, the engineering team is solid. They deserve to survive this. As for management, you got what you cultivated. At 8:45 a.m., the all-hands meeting convened in the main conference room. The atmosphere was thick with dread. Elliot Graves walked in at exactly 9 a.m., flanked by his transition team. He was everything Richard pretended to be: actually charismatic, genuinely brilliant, and utterly ruthless when necessary. Good morning, Elliot began, his voice carrying easily through the room. I'll be direct. Tech Vault, as you knew it, is dead. What we're building from its ashes will be leaner, more honest, and infinitely more effective. He clicked to the first slide, an organizational chart with most of the senior positions marked in red eliminated. 70% of management positions are being eliminated, effective immediately. If you received an email this morning with a blue subject line, you're staying, red subject line, your severance package details are included. No subject line means we're still evaluating. The room erupted in whispers and the sound of phones being checked. I watched the color drain from faces as red subjects lines appeared on screens. However, Elliot continued, there is one person whose position is not in question. Madeline Cooper will be overseeing this transition. She understands this company's true assets and liabilities better than anyone. If you have issues with that, the exit is behind you. Marcus's replacement, he'd been walked out so fast he hadn't even made it to this meeting, actually stood up and left. 3 others followed. Elliot smiled slightly, marking names on his tablet. Self-selection. Efficient, he murmured. After the meeting, I walked through the office one more time. The marketing department was virtually empty, their flashy campaigns and inflated metrics no longer needed. The sales floor was half-staffed. The closers, who'd been rewarded for promises they couldn't keep, notably absent. But the engineering pit was still full. Developers and QA analysts, who'd been ignored for years, suddenly realizing they were the only ones considered valuable. I stopped by my old desk, now cleared and waiting for whoever would fill my former role, if anyone ever would. The photo from our first product launch was still in the drawer where I'd left it, forgotten in my controlled exit 6 weeks ago. I picked it up, studying those naive faces, all of us so certain we were building something special. Lisa appeared beside me, holding a coffee. "The survivors are calling you the angel of death," she said quietly, "but the engineers are calling you something else, the reckoning." "I didn't do this for revenge, Lisa." "Didn't you?" She tilted her head. "You could have blocked the takeover, negotiated better terms for everyone, maybe even reformed the company from within. Instead, you burned it all down." I looked at the photo one more time, then dropped it in the trash. "No, Lisa, they burned it down when they decided people were expendable. I just chose who got to rise from the ashes." At noon, I stood in what used to be Richard's office, now bearing a temporary nameplate with my name. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I watched the old Tech Vault sign being removed from the building's facade. By tomorrow, it would say Nexus Dynamics, and the transformation would be complete. My phone buzzed with a message from Richard. "I hope you're satisfied." I typed back, "Satisfaction implies this was personal. This was just business, something you taught me when you cut my salary." But as I watched the last letter of Tech Vault disappear from the building, I allowed myself one moment of pure, unbridled satisfaction. They'd called me legacy code, deprecated, obsolete. Now their entire empire was obsolete, and I was the only one left standing in the ruins. The irony was perfect, the poetry was divine, and the silence from all those who'd wronged me. That was everything. 6 months later, I stood in the same office that had once belonged to Richard Fenmore, now permanently mine. The nameplate read, Madeline Cooper, Chief Governance Officer, Nexus Dynamics, West Division. The sunset painted the city in shades of gold and amber, a far cry from the gray morning when I'd first returned to claim my revenge. The transformation was complete. What had once been Tech Vault was now the most profitable division of Nexus Dynamics. We'd retained 30% of the original staff, the ones who actually built things, who solved problems, who created value rather than just talking about it. The rest had scattered to the wind, their LinkedIn profiles carefully omitting their time at Tech Vault, as if those years could be erased as easily as they'd tried to erase me. Elliot Graves knocked on my doorframe. "The quarterly numbers," he said, sliding a tablet across my desk. "We're up 300% from Tech Vault's last legitimate quarter. Turns out when you stop lying about metrics and actually deliver products, revenue follows." "Imagine that," I said. Reviewing the figures, every department showed green arrows pointing up except one. HR still showing red. We eliminated the department entirely. Remember, outsourced to a firm that actually understands humans are resources to be developed, not costs to be minimized. Through my window, I could see the coffee shop across the street where Marcus used to hold his strategic breakfast meetings. Last I'd heard, he was consulting corporate speak for unemployed with a LinkedIn premium account. David Cross had landed at a startup in Austin, probably spinning the same tales about synergy and optimization that had fooled Richard, and Richard himself. Teaching entrepreneurship at a community college, which was perhaps the most honest work he'd done in years. Janet from HR had reached out last week, asking if I could be a reference. I'd responded with a single line, "I'll give you exactly the reference you gave me, none." "There's something else," Elliot said, pulling out a second tablet. "The Wall Street Journal wants to do a feature on the acquisition. They're calling it The Compliance Coup and want to interview you about how one person brought down a $250 million company." I laughed, short and sharp. "Tell them I'm not interested. The story's already been told, in the only way that matters, in the numbers, in the survived and the departed, in the silence of empty offices that once buzzed with false promises." Elliot studied me for a moment. "You know, when you first reached out with those anonymous tips, I thought you were just another disgruntled employee looking for petty revenge. Weren't I?" "No," he said, standing to leave. "You were a mirror, showing them exactly what they'd become. They just didn't like the reflection." After he left, I pulled out the one item I'd kept from the old Tech Vault, not a photo or an award, but the original email thread where they'd discussed my salary cut. Marcus had written, "She won't fight back. People like Madeline never do. Too professional, too concerned with references and reputation." I'd had it framed, and it hung behind my desk where only I could see it. A reminder that the quietest people often have the loudest endings. My phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification. A young developer who'd survived the purge had posted, "6 months ago, I watched my company collapse because leadership forgot that every empire is built on individual pillars. Remove the wrong one, and everything falls." Thank you, Madeline Cooper, for teaching us that loyalty is earned, not demanded, and that true power lies not in titles but in knowledge and knowing when to use it. As the last rays of sunlight faded from my office, I thought about power, about revenge, about justice. They taught me an invaluable lesson when they decided I was expendable in the corporate world. There are no friends, no loyalty, no security, only leverage. They'd removed my leverage, so I'd found more. They'd cut my salary, so I'd cut their company out from under them. The janitor knocked, ready to clean the executive floor. It was the same man who'd been there the night I'd cleared out my desk 6 weeks before everything changed. He'd been the only one to help me carry my boxes to my car. The only one to say he was sorry about what had happened. "Ms. Cooper," he nodded. "Working late again." "Just finishing up. Robert, how's your daughter's college applications going?" His face lit up. "She got into Stanford, full scholarship, computer science, just like she wanted." "That's wonderful." I pulled out my business card. "Have her call me when she graduates. We'll need good engineers who understand that the code is only as strong as the people who write it." After he left, I stood at the window one last time. The city sprawled below. Thousands of offices where similar dramas played out daily. People deemed expendable. Talent wasted. Loyalty betrayed. Most would leave quietly, professionally, accepting their fate. But every now and then, someone would remember they had power. Someone would refuse to go gentle into that corporate night. Someone would burn it all down rather than be burned. I turned off the lights and walked out, my heels clicking on the marble floor with the confidence of someone who'd lost everything and gained an empire in return. They'd called it the most devastating corporate collapse in Silicon Valley history. I called it justice. And somewhere in this city, in another glass tower, another executive was probably deciding someone was expendable. Someone was legacy code that needed to be deleted. They should be careful. They should be very, very careful. Because you never know who's holding the keys to your kingdom until they decide to use them. Thank you for listening to my story of corporate revenge. Where are you tuning in from today? Drop a comment below and let's connect. I'd love to hear if you've witnessed similar workplace injustices. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts on what you would have done in my position. Remember, sometimes the quietest person in the office holds the most power.